Hi, Garland Nixon here. It's Wednesday morning. No Scott Ritter today. That's been postponed until tomorrow at 9 a.m. But we're going to talk about Joe Biden summit for hypocrisy. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here. And for those of you expecting the Wednesday morning Scott Ritter, unfortunately, Scott can't make it. He's traveling today, but we've moved that till tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. So sorry about that. All who were expecting it. I was too. And then Scott, he's in Texas. He's traveling, doing Scott Ritter things. So thanks a lot for everybody for being patient. And I'll see you tomorrow morning to talk about Brother Ritter. At any rate, so let's talk about the Summit for Democracy. That's just as good as anything, right? So what's going on is the Cold War has been rebranded. You know, it's like when you got a brand and it doesn't work and you come up with a new name for it. You're sitting around and you're like, sugar snaps won't work anymore. We'll call them snaps. Sugar crisp won't work anymore because sugar used to be about taste. And now it's a bad thing to talk about sugar. So we're going to give you the same product, but we're going to call them sugar crisps and things like that. Frosted Flakes instead of sugar covered things. So what do? In the Cold War, here's the bottom line. During the Cold War, let's think about this. The United States hated Russia. And what they told the people here are Russia's a communist country. Communism is evil. We must hate communism. That communism is a terrible thing. You know what I found? Most Americans have no clue what communism is, but they hate communism. But they don't know what it is, which would be fine hating it if you knew what it was. It's just the concept of saying, I don't like X. Okay, define X. Explain to me about X. Tell me about X. I want to know if think about it. Think about it. I want to know if I like it, right? So if someone says to you, I don't think that blank is a good ideology, and you don't know anything about blank, you'd say, oh, well, you don't think it's a good ideology. That implies that you have a pretty good understanding of it. So I don't know. I may like it. I may dislike it. Or here's another one. I may be an expert on that ideology. I may have written books, The Idiot's Guide to X. And I may say to you, well, I really like that ideology myself. Perhaps you can enlighten me as to why you think it's bad. You know what the problem is in America? Are you going to get a stupid look on your face when you ask about communism? So talk to me about communism. Oh, it's evil. Okay, well, I understand that you've taken a moral position on it, but tell me about it, how it works. It kills lots of people. Well, I don't know if you've been paying attention to capitalism. Does the same thing. Tell me about how it works. Tell me about what it is and how it works. And about 99.9% of Americans are going to say, perhaps I should call somebody, maybe a friend. Can I call a lifeline? Because they don't know. My point being, it was a religion in America. You got to hate Russia because they're communist and communists are evil. You don't want to be an evil commie, do you? No, because communism is evil. And you don't even want to know what communism is, do you? Don't want to know. Good. Now, where am I going with this? Because I'm going somewhere. So that being said, there's a problem. The United States, Russia's still in the problem of the neocons, particularly the Biden people, because they're cold warriors. Look, it's no accident. This guy's in his 80s and he's pushing an agenda from the 1960s, right? From back in the day. Why, I remember when we used to hate commies back in my day. Doggone it, let's do it today. The problem is Russia's not a communist country. The problem is, per se, China is not a communist country in that it isn't a closed system. It has there are very strong elements of capitalism. China is a very hybrid system in that it has a lot of open markets. It's tightly controlled markets, but it's not the traditional communism closed market as, say, the USSR was, and that the US was accustomed to maligning during the Cold War. So things have changed. Russia now, not getting communism anymore, not a communist country anymore. Here's the problem. The US now says we don't like Russia. Russia's terrible. Russia's evil. Russia's awesome. Why? Because they're not communists. No, but there's something just as bad. What's that? Authoritarian. Well, what about China? Authoritarian. Cuba, authoritarian. And they're communists too. Nicaragua, authoritarian. Socialist. Venezuela, authoritarian. Well, what about, say, Syria? Authoritarian. You see, my friends, it's a new branding on the same thing. The problem with Russia was never that they were a communist country. The problem with China is not that they're a communist country today, because they're a hybrid country. The problem, look at, let me give you an example. The United States has very good relations with Vietnam. And the United States is literally asking Vietnam, can we put bases in your country? Donald Trump went to Vietnam. Hey, Vietnam, you guys sure your economy's roaring? You're doing good work. And he left Vietnam. Now, do you happen to know the political party that is in control of Vietnam? It is the Communist Party. So, if in fact it was just pure communism that the US hated, we couldn't have good relations with Vietnam. We couldn't ask them if we could put a base in there. We couldn't do anything with Vietnam. Donald Trump couldn't say, boy, your economy's roaring, you're doing a great job. Why is that? Why is that? We can do it because what it's always been about is hegemony. What it's always been about is being the dominant force in the world. Vietnam is a communist country, but it's not a hindrance to US controlling everything. It's not an option. Vietnam's not going into Africa where the US comes to a country and says, give us all your resources or we'll kill you. And China comes in and says, hey, let's make a business deal. Or Russia, let's make a business deal. That's the problem the United States have. Vietnam doesn't have the wherewithal economic to do that, to offer an alternative to other countries. So the bottom line is they hated Russia when they were communists. Now they hate Russia when they're not communists. And they've just come up with a new word, authoritarian countries. What does that really mean? It means the opposite of what it is. It's doublespeak, right? If you think of of Russia, what is Russia now? Let's add this. Russia, China, Nicaragua, Venezuela, what do they have in common? Right? Venezuela is not run by the Communist Party. It's run by the Socialist Party. Bolivia, the Socialist Party. Nicaragua, Socialist Party, right? They're socialist parties. China, Communist Party of China. Russia, what is it called? United Russia or whatever the party is. It's neither, it's not a socialist or a communist, right? But what do they really have in common that Biden really hates? Let's start here, and that is with an economic model that seems to be a model that is being adopted throughout the world and seems to be fairly successful. And that is this. If you've heard that before, this means talk about this before. Sorry, I have, but it's important here. Venezuela, what did they do? What did Hugo Chavez do when he came in? He said, we got all of this oil. We're going to nationalize the oil, and we're going to use the oil for the benefit of the people, right? There was a lot of poor indigenous people. The United States had run Venezuela for 100 years, and the indigenous people were very, very poor. They had been, all of the oil was pumped out, and they got none of the money. They got nothing. Right. So you had you had the majority of the country. It was a minority run country. You had the majority of the country, which were the indigenous people. I've been to Venezuela. You got people that are indigenous. You got people that are, the indigenous tribes. You got people who were former slaves during the slavery times, and you got people that are mixed up all together with them, and with some Spaniards too. So you've got this huge group of kind of brownish, blackish, indigenous, reddish kind of various people. Most beautiful women you've ever seen in your life. Most beautiful women in the world in Venezuela. And they're all mixed up, and they're all Spanish and this and that, and just a wonderful people. Love the people. And but they were kept poor because it was minority run, and the U.S. just basically took all of their resources and kept all of the money. So Chavez comes in and he says, we're going to nationalize our natural resources, and the money is going to go to help the people who've been here for thousands of years and are getting screwed. And the U.S. wasn't happy about that. What is happening so it's a government that has state-owned companies to nationalize the natural resources and utilize those money for the benefit of the poor and the working class and the working poor and things of that nature. Well, what does Russia have? Russia has these gigantic corporations that do what? Pump gas, pump oil, build stuff, right? And what they do is they're in even their military industrial complex, etc. So Russia is a country that's not a communist party. It's not run by the Communist Party of Russia. There's still a significant communist party in Russia, and they do have political influence. I believe it's the second largest party in Russia. But here's the bottom line. What they do is they've got a lot of natural resources. That's what Russia has. So what does Russia do? Russia has nationalized a lot of the natural resources. They didn't have to, because it was already that way. They bring in, sell oil, they sell gas, they do all kinds of stuff. That money comes into the government uses it to build things and to run the government, and they don't have to tax the bloody hell out of the people, and they don't have to use neoliberalism to extract money from the people to do it. So they have a similar economic structure. And what does China do? They've got gigantic corporations. I think about 70% of the economy is owned by the government, 30% is owned by private. And so they have and it's heavily regulated, and the government has a heavy fist on regulation, and they do 5-year plans and 10-year plans. And so it's a planned economy. Iran, the government controls the economy. So the bottom line is this. What these countries have is two things. Number one, and that is they have a government controlled sector that brings money into to run the government and to run the country. Number one, the opposite of neoliberalism. Number two, that means in order to do that, you have to have a strong central government. Right now, one of the things, let me say this, one of the things that and this is something I think that is important to discuss here in this context. One of the things that libertarians talk about is a small government and being conservative, small government, big government, small government versus big government, right? Okay, I'm going to tell you why I think they miss when you talk about small government and big government, you miss the mark in the discussion about what kind of government you want. You miss the mark completely. Let's start here. That's a metaphor, right? That's inactive. That is inadequate. A government that's small, what does that mean? Fewer people? Small is a metaphor. Like, is the government this big or is it that big? Is it 8 feet high or is it 12 feet high? Is it 4 square meters or is it 12 square meters? Does it have 100 people or does it have 1 million people, right? There's an implication in this metaphor, right? It's a physical metaphor, large versus small. There's an implication in the metaphor of large government versus small government. What I'm talking about is I'm talking about speech and what our words mean and what speech means, right? The implication is that a government with more people has greater control. So large government, right? More people working for the government, that implies the government has greater control over the people. Small government implies less people working for the government and less control over the people, right? Now, those aren't factual, but that's what's implied. So when the libertarian or conservative or whoever says small government versus big government, what they're really saying is a government that has the power to make decisions for people. What they really mean is unintrusive government versus a non-intrusive government. And they use the metaphor large versus small. The sad thing is, because they use that, and it's a physical metaphor, right? It's a physical metaphor. It's something in the physical space, big versus small. So when you use the metaphor of big government versus small government, it actually goes into the into your thought process, and you actually start to believe that a government that has more people working for it is going to be more intrusive than a government that has less people working for it. That's an implication, but it's false. What you're really saying is, I want a less intrusive government. If you ask a libertarian or a conservative, how about this? We take the government and the government cuts in half the number of people that work for it, but it doubles the most intrusive regulations that you could possibly imagine. Those regulations are now, and rules and laws are now enacted, but there's going to be half the people in the government, right? Is that what you want? You got a smaller government, but you have a considerably more intrusive government, a more regulatory government, a government that's all over your back, but there's just less people. Is that what you want? Or we can do this. We can keep the government with the exact same number of people, number of everything, but we'll cut the intrusiveness of the government. It'll be far less intrusive. In reality, a libertarian or a conservative who's about his salts, or many oftentimes even a progressive person from some perspectives will look at that and say, and like me, a civil libertarian, in a lot of ways, I want the government to be less intrusive. And there are certain, now, what do I believe in? I do believe in a strong central government. Now, that being said, a lot of libertarians argue, and I understand it's based on their experience with the U.S. government, their experience with the U.S. empire. So this is a legitimate position. A lot of libertarians say the more power the government gets, the more intrusive it gets, the more evil it gets, the more it takes control over us. So I want a less intrusive government in all phases. I understand that because that's based on their experience with the U.S. empire, and it is certainly a valid experience. But that doesn't mean that's the only experience for governments. Different cultures can have a strong central government that's not as intrusive. And let me add this. Another culture may have a government where they want a little more intrusive. For instance, look at the Chinese government. The U.S. is always talking about, I mean, the conservatives particularly, are always talking about the Chinese government. Oh, the Chinese government, as an example. They did this thing, I don't know the exact number of hours, but they passed this rule that said during school nights, and I'm going to throw this hours, during the school week from Monday through Friday, keep in mind, this is not the actual number of hours, but I don't think it's that far. During the school week, children can only be online playing video games for 5 hours, right? And I don't know if that's the number of hours, but it's a small number of hours. And it was why? Because kids should be doing their homework and having a life and doing other stuff, and they shouldn't be staring into this stinking screen all day. Now, the libertarian would argue, hey, man, don't be telling my kids what to watch and when to watch it. However, in the Chinese culture, that was not rejected. In the Chinese culture was like, yeah, that's fine. We're good with that because we want our kids to work hard in school. So depending upon your culture, one size doesn't fit all. You cannot say to people in the Chinese culture, your government shouldn't say this or that. They may be perfectly fine with their government saying this or that. That's the problem with the US. The Chinese are authoritarians and they're doing this and that. The Chinese government has a 90% and plus above 90% approval rating. So what right does the United States have to say that that government is authoritarian if the people are happy? And let me add this. They had the COVID stuff going on, right? And what happened? The people in China started protesting. And what did the Chinese do? They relaxed the COVID standards. Within days, the Chinese people took to the street. And of course, the United States, yeah, oh boy, they're in the street now. Oh, you're going to get it now. Now, keeping in mind that when people in the West protested against the COVID, some of the, what people believe were intrusive COVID moves, the U.S. sent the black-suited, black helmet police out to beat the hell out of them. Right, and call them, crazy anti-vaxxers and madmen. When people did the exact same thing in China, they were freedom fighters for democracy. But here's the difference: within days, China relaxed the standards. If you remember what happened with the truckers, I watched the truckers, and I'm like, they just seem like normal people out there who've kind of had enough of this stuff, and they went out. And what happened to Trudeau? He called them Nazis and took authoritarian action against these people. I thought that was unfair and unreasonable and authoritarian. And that's not what China did. So tell me, China's authoritarian? Compare them. I'm not here to defend China or say that they're great or wonderful. All I'm saying is this: I ain't Chinese. It's none of my business. And the idea that conservatives, libertarians, liberals, whoever can say that China's government is doing something wrong to its people when it has over a 90% approval rating is absurd. Let the Chinese people figure that out. But it's not about that. All of these about this summit for democracy has nothing to do with it. It is nothing but a way to reinforce the rebranding of the Cold War. We got to stop communism. Why? Because this is an alternate way of life. People have a right to that if they want to do it. It's not our business. And because that'll get in the way of us being in control and domination over the world and the world's resources, and our corporate America going out there and getting anything and making all the money they want. Number one. Well, guess what? As communism in its original form started to dilute into a socialism, a Bolivarian socialism, if you're familiar with that in South America, which is a much more relaxed form of socialism, but still with some of the tenets of Marxism and Leninism, if you understand and study these stuff from an intellectual rather than a visceral, emotional perspective, and you say, if that's what the people in Venezuela want and it works for them, go for it. And if they don't like it, they'll change it. If they will, if they don't like it, they'll change it. If they do like it, they won't. You know, we don't have a right to go tell them what to do. It may work perfectly for their culture. And it seems to me that what they call socialism with the Chinese, I'll use this word, twinge, seems to be working well for the Chinese. None of our damn business, but it ain't about. Notice this. We have this summit for democracy, right? So it's democracy versus authoritarianism. Now, Russia's not a communist country, but they're authoritarian. Now, when they talk about China, what do they constantly say? The Chinese Communist Party, the authoritarian Chinese Communist Party, right? So they're trying to really play both games at the same time. They're still sticking with the Cold War. Oh no, they're communists. They're going with the new hybrid. Well, there's authoritarian and communist, and wherever it applies, they're authoritarian, they're communist. And then Venezuela, the socialist leader, or so-and-so, of Maduro. So it's rhetoric, but it all boils down to the same thing. It is an attempt. There we go. Socialism with Chinese characteristics. It boils down to the same thing. It is an attempt to dominate the world. But you got to bullcrap your people. You got to lie to the American people. Because if you say to the American people, look, we're starting these wars, we're risking the planet with nuclear annihilation, we're doing all these really aggressive and assertive things against countries, that overthrowing governments and all that. We're doing that because we want to dominate the world. The American people will, in all likelihood, question the obvious morality there. There's some obvious moral questions. So instead of that, you have to turn it into effectively the Crusades, right? This religious ideological crusade. We have a God-given right as the exceptional country. We have a God-given right to go around the world and set things straight. We have to remember rules-based order, right? What is that about? It is about, let me say this. It's about an inherent fear that's drilled into people. And that is the fear of chaos. If you listen to politicians, I'll never forget, they were, I was doing a radio show in Washington, still doing my radio show in Washington, D.C. Don't know how much longer I'm going to be doing that. But when they legalized marijuana's legalized, and it was effective on a Thursday. And there was a Washington Post article. If they don't get the regulations straight, there'll be chaos on Thursday. And I'm like, I did my show. I said, there ain't going to be no chaos on Thursday. The people that smoke weed at midnight on Wednesday night, when it becomes legal, are going to light up a joint. Some people may take a shot of their favorite bourbon. Nothing wrong with that. If you like to smoke weed and you smoke up a joint in celebration, do it. If you like some Buffalo Trace or some whatever you may like, some Crown Royal, it don't matter to me. Put it in a little glass with some ice and turn one up for celebration. Do what you got to do to celebrate. High five your friend, kiss your girl, whatever you do. I don't care about that. But there ain't going to be chaos on Thursday. And I said, what's going to happen? All of a sudden, the clock is going to strike 12, and people are going to start running back and forth up in the street, through the streets with their arms up in the air, screaming, lighting things on fire like they are in Paris because weed's legal now. Okay. But they haven't finished the regulations. Oh no, the government hasn't finished the regulations for weed. No, and then they run the street. That's absurd. But it is to go after that inherent fear that is drilled into our culture, the fear of chaos. Now in Zen, we argue there ain't nothing wrong with chaos. That in order to have control, in order to have order, the only way you know that there's order is if there's chaos. There's got to be chaos, so you would know there's order. There's got to be, if you look at the little circular or Asian thing with the fish, there's a white fish and a black fish in there. You can spin them around in circles. The reason you know there's a white fish because there's a black fish. You can't get rid of one of them. If you get rid of one of them, you'll have a black circle or you'll have a white circle. You got to have the black fish and the white fish in order to have the two fish, right? And that's the same way with everything. In order for them to be things, there has to be space between things. It's the space it's the space between the bars that keeps the tire in, right? It is the fact that there is chaos that creates the opportunity for order. And oftentimes things that look like chaos are in fact an order. If you look at something really, really, really close, if you get really, really close to a picture, an old newspaper picture, what do you see? A bunch of dots, black dots. As you back away, it comes into an order, and then all of a sudden you can see, hey, that's a picture of Garland in a newspaper. Oh my God, they're taking him to Guantanamo Bay, right? But you didn't know that until you got far enough away that all of those little pixels came together and made order. So what at one magnification looks like chaos, at another magnification looks like perfect order. So what the U.S. is arguing is it is our job to create order. We have to manifest order. That order doesn't exist organically, which means we're playing God. That's what the U.S. is saying. It's playing God. We have to go manifest order, right? We have to go into this planet. This planet, let me ask you this. Was this planet here before we got here? And will it be here when we're gone? Was this universe here before we got here? Will it be here when we're gone? You know what I mean? And what we're calling order is simply domination by us. So the U.S. says we have a rules-based order. What they mean is domination, and we create the rules. The problem is this: even if we believe we create the rules, we don't. Okay, I'm going to make a rule. You ready? Birds can no longer fly, and I command you birds not to fly. And that's the law, and any bird must know that. You think birds are going to stop flying because there's now a rule? No, there's a greater rule than that, and that's you don't make the rules. So now we're going to say that we're having a summit for democracy, and we're going to bring together those who we deem to be democratic countries. But what are we bringing them together for? Even then, why do we have to bring together a bunch of democratic countries to talk about the authoritarian countries? You see what I mean? We don't even know we're democratic country unless we talk about an authoritarian country. What are you going to bring together? You don't even know you're a saved unless you got a sinner to talk about. How do you know you're saved? Because there's a sinner over there. How do you know you're good? Because there's a bad person. So we're going to create a paradigm in this summit for democracy. You know, I'd love to go sit there and take notes and listen to what they say, because it's going to be something like this. We're the good guys. We do good stuff. Oh man, are we good? Our way of doing things is great. It's wonderful. We create order. It's a rules-based order. You know, those guys over there, they're bad, 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 bad. Now, here's the problem with that. I will guarantee you that there's not one leader in Europe or the United States that has the approval rating of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, of Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua. These guys are up around 60% or better, both of them. Of Vladimir Putin, he's over 80%. Of the Chinese government with Xi Jinping, over 90%. There is not a leader who's going to be part of the U.S.'s empire of the U.S. and Europe that have anything like that, anywhere near that. So the issue is, to me, is not democracy. The issue is this. Let me ask you this. When before we had countries and all that, when people were kind of hanging around in small groups, tribes, whatever you want to call them, right? How did they know they were doing the right thing? How did they know they screwed up, right? If they didn't, they died. If you got a ragtag group of people, you know, 1,000 years ago, a couple thousand years ago, several thousand years ago, and you're wandering around the forest of France, the mountains, whatever, right? And you're wandering around and you're living off berries and fruits and doing various things several thousand years ago, and you're much more primitive. How do you know if your group screws up? You die. You die. If you don't do the things you need to do in the right way, you die. Now, you're going to die sooner or later anyway, but the whole group dies. So it's about survival. So there's an easy way to tell if what you're doing is working. right? So now we have a society, and you ask yourself, how do you know that the government's doing what they're supposed to do? Forget these words of conservative and libertarian and anarchy, and we got words that we apply to various governments. And then we jump into one of those camps. I'm a liberal, I'm an anarchist, I'm a progressive, I'm a whatever, right? So we create, as they say, in psychiatry, neurologists create castles in the sky. What is it? And the I'm having neurology, the psychopaths and whatever live in it, right? Psychotic, that's it. Neurologists create castles in the sky, psychotics live in them, right? So now we're going to create all of these manifestations of government in our mind. There's anarchism, there's libertarianism, there's conservative, there's this, there's all of that, right? And then we're going to jump into one of these groups, and then we got to defend that group, because whichever group is in is the best. That's the way everybody ought to be doing things. Everybody should do things my way, because this way works. Some of these ways have never been tested, but you know it works, right? Instead of simply saying, you know what? And then we have the brand. Now we got nice little groups, and we can join one of them, and we can defend our group. Now, what Biden and the neocons have simply done is said, look, we need to create groups for people so that we can usher these poor suckers into one of the groups, and we can have them believe that they're in the good group. Guys, democracy versus authoritarianism. What do you want to be in, huh? Wouldn't want to be in authoritarianism, would you? You want to be in democracy. So they've created this group where there is no question before the groups are created. Hey, we created two groups. What are the two groups? The good guys and the bad guys. Which group do you want to be in? Well, obviously, I want to be in the good guys. Okay, then shut up. But when you look at the good guys, they ain't good. See, that's the problem. We're democracy, but when you look at the democracy, particularly under Joe Biden, and the democracy has been getting less and less democratic. And let me add this. A way to judge a government, forget all of these false terms, libertarianism, conservatism, communism, capitalism, all these words mean crap. How do you judge a government, right? How did you judge that little tribe 10,000 years ago wandering through the forests of France? Either they survived or they didn't. What you judged these groups on, whatever governing, they may have a tribe leader, whatever, right? Or not, a group of elders, things of that nature. How did you, whether or not it worked? So how will I judge the US government, the French government, the Chinese government, the Russian government? Here's the way I'll judge it. Since I'm not Chinese or Russian or French, you know how I'll judge it? I'll judge it this. Do the people in that country like it? Are they happy with it? I mean, the U.S. implies that we've got to go to China and we've got to save the Chinese from the Chinese government, that they've got an authoritarian government. Therefore, we got to fix that for them. Even though 90% of the Chinese people like that, we got to go fix that. Putin's an authoritarian. Therefore, we got to fix that. Why? Because the Russian people like that. So what does that make them all authoritarians? You know, we got to go fix a government even when the people like it. And then we say, but look what he's doing in Ukraine. Well, okay, is it you're against the occupation or the invasion of another country? Well, you have to put it in context. What the hell are we doing pumping weapons into Ukraine for the last umpteen years? What hell are we doing building bases and putting missile sites and all of that? What are we doing on Russia's border, building up a military monster to go to war with Russia? And what would we do if Russia or China did that in Mexico? Or more likely, a very more apt analogy would be Canada. What if the Russians and the Chinese overthrew the government of Canada and then started building up this anti-American army in Canada to fight the U.S.? That would be a pretty apt analogy. What would we do? We go to war. So the bottom line is this: the U.S. government has to lie to the American people. And I think that's one of the reasons, if you really get into it, why we're having so much trouble in America, because more and more people are figuring out that A, they're being lied to, and B, that the system doesn't work for them. The system works for a very small group of oligarchs, and Americans are figuring out. So now we have a government that is highly unpopular, saying we've got to have a summit of governments. Mostly, think about this. We could relabel this. The summit for unpopular governments and popular governments. Why don't we do that? Why don't we do this? Why don't we have a summit for governments and we say, based on, you will be put in two categories based on the approval ratings by your respective countries, right? Well, one thing for sure, Nicaragua, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Russia, China would be in one because they're all very high approval ratings. We'd be in another one. Now, what do you think the approval rating is right now? The French government. I mean, the French right now, the French are in the democracy side. The people are in the street burning the damn place down. Every video you see, there's guys in black suits with motorcycle helmets running after the protesters, beating the bloody frog crap out of the protesters. And that's the democracy. Germany, just yesterday, nationwide strike. The people are furious. Guess what? That's the democracy. The United States, right now, fighting, our government is fighting to stop an investigation into who attacked Germany. That's our plan. Germany was attacked by someone. A military attack on Germany, on our ally. We claim that this whole war is about protecting our allies. We got a war going on that the U.S. started. And the U.S. says this war is about protecting our allies, and in particular, Germany. Okay, Germany's been attacked. We need to do an investigation. We don't want to do an investigation. We're going to fight hard to stop an investigation. We're protecting our ally, particularly Germany, from being attacked. They've been attacked, and the United States is fighting to stop the investigation. And I think we all know why, because the U.S. was the one that attacked Germany. So now the U.S. is like, hey, we can't have an investigation. Why? Well, we're too busy having a summit right now for democracies. I mean, we want an authoritarian country to be running the world right now. I mean, we'd love to investigate it. Of course, you know, things get blown up and bad things happen. And, you know, they really need to be looked into. And when we get a chance, we're going to do an investigation. But right now, it's summit for democracies. I mean, you know, you got to order coffee and Danishes and stuff like that. We had to have our, you know, everything printed, and we had some guy come in and paint stuff up. And, you know, I mean, you got to get people in here for hotel rooms. So when we get a chance, we're going to look into who attacked Germany. I'm sure it was a bad guy. Of course, whoever did it, don't get me wrong, probably had the best of intentions. You know, I mean, if we actually ever find out who did it, I think we should go easy on that person, because I think, you know, sometimes people make bad decisions and, you know, they're not in a good mood. Maybe they had a fight with their dog bit them, had a fight with their wife, you know, I mean, so whoever we find out that bombed Germany, although we already know it was a bunch of schmucks on a sailboat or something like that, we should go easy on whoever and I don't want to use the word perpetrator, because that has such a negative, such a pejorative term to it. The person who was involved in this unfortunate deed. If we ever find out, which I'm sure we won't, and we believe we should find out, but we should not do an investigation to find out. If we find out who did it, doggone it, we should give them a firm slap on the wrist and send them on about their business, because I'm sure they didn't mean anything about it. But at any rate, right now, no time for that. We got a summit for democracies because, you know, countries are doing bad things, and we got to stand up to that for the people, we always say. And Germany's there, and the German leaders are like, yeah, somebody attacked us. And hey, were you involved in it? Oh, hey, right now we got to go to the summit for democracies, but when we get back, we'll be all over that question. No. The United States attacked Germany, and it appears to me that the German government was in on it. Now, the term quizzling, a government who conspires with an outside occupier. Let's see, the U.S. has bases all over Germany. They attacked Germany, and it certainly appears there are certainly assertions and allegations that the government of Germany either participated or knew and is refusing to assist in the investigation. I think that is the very definition of a quizzling government. That's what you got in Germany. You got a bunch of traitors. Now, I'm going to say, if you had the summit for traitors, Germany should be the first presenter. You should actually have the German flag if you've got the summit for traitors instead of the summit for democracy, summit for the Vichy Quisling governments. There you go. You start with Germany. If you got the summit for the elitist governments who screw their people over and beat the hell out of them when they try to protest, well, you'd start off with France. There'd be Macron, former Rothschild banker. And then the U.S. could find like somebody from Citibank, somebody from Goldman Sachs, somebody from J.P. Morgan, and you put them all together, and hey, man, you got yourself a nice little group there. So the bottom line is, this Summit for Democracy has no way, shape, or form, no relevance to democracy. This is a summit for Quisling traitors. It is a summit for people who other governments that they've invited are scared. It's like the coalition of the willing, people that are scared. Hey, they'll like some small island in the Pacific will be there, and they'll say, yes, that goes to show that we're involved. And there'll be like some small island, the island of, whatever, lava. Hey, the people of lava are democracy, and they stand with us. How many people are on the island of lava? About 12. But, it's a very democratic 12 right there. They got one guy in charge. In fact, all 12 people are in charge, but that's not important. What's important is we interpret that as a democracy. The island of lava, they do a great job. They export coconuts and, palm leaves and stuff like that. So the island of lava is part of the Summit for Democracy. And the people of lava didn't even want to go. They just went there and say, hey, we need you to do that. The people of lava goes, nah, no thanks, Yankees. They're like, oh, yeah, well, if you don't, we're blowing up your island. Hey, give me a first ticket. I'm en route to the Summit for Democracy. And that's the way the U.S. does it, too. I mean, when the small countries that are there, it's not like they have a choice. Like in the UN, when they're like, hey, the other day they had this UNSC, the Security Council vote on whether or not to investigate the Nord Stream bombing. And all of these countries abstained. Why do you think they abstained? Do you think they're like, we don't want to know who did it? No, because the U.S. went to these countries and said, hey, just saying, you should abstain. Well, but we might want to know. Oh, yeah, that's right. Here we got a deal for you. If you abstain, we won't kill you. Well, come to think of it, abstention is the way we do things. Yes, sirree, we're going to abstain. You can count on us for an abstention. That's what it is. You know how the U.S., how Blinken and those common street thugs do. They go around to people and they say, do what I tell you or I'll kill you. That's the way they do things. Everybody in the world knows it. Americans seem to think that we've got a bunch of kind and gentle people running around dropping flowers on leaders on the world. No, they don't drop flowers on them. They stick a gun in their friggin' mouth and they say, you do what we tell you or we will kill you and everybody dear to you. And trust me, they will. And have. Just ask the Ukrainians how things are working out for them. They will keep fighting until they run out of Ukrainians. They're perfectly happy to kill every Ukrainian. They're throwing them into the gauntlet. So my point being this, that what we're looking at with this so-called Summit for Democracy is nothing but a rebranding of anti-communism. Now it's anti-authoritarianism because that term doesn't work anymore. And they're doing this to try to make the argument that is the United States' job to bring order to the world, a world of chaos, and the United States will manipulate that chaos and turn it into order. Now, they say a U.S.-led order. In other words, they don't even try to pretend that it's going to be a democratic order. Think about it. Hey, I'm going to create an order around here. What's it going to be? Well, for starters, I'm going to be in charge. Seems a bit self-serving. Shut up or I'll kill you. So Blinken's like, we're going to create a U.S.-led order. What does that mean? That means that we're going to be in charge. Now, I think I see why you're motivated to have that order and to keep it going. The problem is it's already too late. The order is gone. You're trying to save something that died. It's Weekend at Bernie's with the rules-based order. That thing done died a week ago. It's over. I'm not saying a week ago, died long ago, but the rule. So you're trying to pump life into a corpse, into a zombie. If the rules-based order were truly, we personified it, it would be walking through the street going, oh, you've seen the zombie movies. Oh, oh. Hey, who's that? Looks like a zombie. Nope. That's the rules-based order. That's Tony Blinken's zombie order. But he hasn't figured out it's a zombie. That's the only thing about it is he's trying to pretend that it's not a zombie. We're going to hold on. They're running around in Africa right now. Blinken and Kamala Harris telling the Africans, you know, all those years, the last couple hundred years that the U.S. and the colonial powers in Europe have screwed you over, stolen everything you have, and genocided your people. Yeah, perhaps we can move on from that. The Africans are like, get out of here, Yankee. I don't think so. Right? They're going to the Middle East. Well, you know, we've been bombing your countries and doing all kinds of things. And hold on a second. Hold on. Wait a minute. Go over there and bomb Syria again. Good work. Yeah, we've been bombing your countries and doing all kinds of terrible things. But I think now you should trust us to bring order from the chaos as they bomb Syria and threaten Iran right now. The Saudis are like, hey, let's make a deal with Iran. The UAE, Bahrain, hey, we're going to make a deal with Iran. And the U.S., you know, we might have to attack Iran. And then there's Korea. The U.S. is like, yeah, you know, we got to do some war games on the border of Korea. We might have to attack Korea. What about China? Well, we're moving stuff into the, moving more weapons into the Pacific. What? To deter China. To deter them from what? Existing? So that's your rules-based order where you bring more weapons into everyone to stop authoritarianism. Why? We might have to attack your country. Why? Because it's too authoritarian. And so we'll just, out of the blue, surround you with bases and attack you. Why? Because we're opposed to authoritarianism, because they just like attack people and stuff. Out of the blue, they surround them with bases and attack people. We don't agree with that whatsoever. That's authoritarianism. We're about a democratic world where people decide for themselves and make their own decisions. So what are you going to do? We're going to surround your bases and attack and kill as many people as we can until we're in charge again. It is an ideological crusade of ideologues and of liars and frauds and neocons. That's what it is. That's all it is. Yeah, I see that. Somebody said the rule-based order. Well, with Joe Biden in charge, yeah, that's what we could call it, the rule-based order, if he was in fact in charge, which he isn't. No, yes, isn't today Garland's Warrior Update with Scott Ritter? Somebody asked. Nope, that's tomorrow. Scott Ritter's in Texas, and he can't do today. He's busy. So thanks a lot, you guys. I'm going to now, since I got to get ready to run, but I do want to check if there are any super chats, which I don't see any, which is fine. Let's look. Are there any super chats? I don't think there are. Wow, 1,100 people this morning. What a beautiful morning. No, not a super chat. Oh, there's well, because I like to answer the questions. All right. Dina Patalukas. Well, that sounds great. Thank you, Garland, for these great talks. You've got a great community. Yes, Dina, you certainly. And of course, the leader of our philosophical leader of our rules-based order, Chicken Patty. All right. And what about Gonzo Lira trying to make out Taibbi as dodgy? I don't know. You know, look, people say whatever they want to say. Somebody said that on Rockfin. I'm answering the Rockfin stuff now. How about this? Vinesh Patel says, hey, Garland, I always thought that the Western overlords in Washington want and preach democracy because it's the easiest political system to subvert and corrupt. You know, it sounds good to the people. That's what it is. They're pitching something that sounds good. This is a public relations deal, and they'll pitch something that democracy sounds good in through the context of American culture. Sounds great. You're standing for democracy. You're fighting for democracy. It's just the word that works the best. That's all it is. It's the word that works for these people. Anything else? Somebody said Washington. So, face blue, wide eyes. Face blue, wide eyes. I wonder what that means. Gonzo also attacked Scott Ritter. Take it with a bit of salt. Someone else says. Here's one. The U.S. is already paying a high price for Joe Biden attacking U.S. old allies to please their worst opponents. U.S. old allies have started to rely on China instead of the U.S. to get protection. Yeah, the bottom line is the Biden people are just an absolute disaster. Oh, I just saw somebody earlier, Leonard. I want to see what Leonard has to say. Leonard Hallberg says the U.S. are. Oh, that was Leonard Hallberg. That's it. How about this? The mainstream Scott Ritter, though the mud back through the mud back during the invasion and occupation of Iraq. Okay. Now look at another one. I am presenting something the U.S. would not like you to know. We the people, e pluribus unum. Well, guys, oh, we got one more person who has something to say. Scott Johnson did another tip. Thanks a lot, Scott. I certainly appreciate it. All right, guys and girls, thank you. Thanks everybody for, and I just wanted to get some philosophical discussion in there on a Wednesday morning. Bottom line, thanks everybody. Anyone who can, make sure I'm gonna have Scott Ritter on tomorrow, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Scott Ritter will be on 9 a.m. tomorrow. And that is my bottom line on Rockfin. Please go over there, make sure you join. It doesn't cost anything to be a member. They don't have advertisements. It's a great place to watch stuff. And there's a lot of other great stuff on Rockfin, not just me. A lot of good stuff on Rockfin. If you start looking around there, you'll find all the good conspiracy theorists and crazy people like me that are out there. A lot of good stuff. You'll love it. The Last American Vagabond. Oh, come on. Slow News Day. You name it. Jason Burmis. I mean, a lot of stuff. There's stuff I agree with. There's stuff I don't agree with. Even David Icke's on there. David Icke's on there. All kinds of people are on there. Everybody who ain't allowed to be anywhere else can be on Rockfin. So go over there, become a member, and look around on Rockfin and find all the good stuff and interesting stuff. Some you'll agree with, some you won't, but a lot of pushback against the mainstream because it's an uncensored platform. So become a member of my Rockfin channel if you can afford it, because they don't charge anything. They don't have advertisements. The way they stay on the air is through people who are become a subscriber. So if you can afford it, it's like $14.99 a month. But if you join for a year, it drops down to like $12 or so, because they give you a couple free months. So if you can afford to be a subscriber, become a subscriber. That's my subscriber only show tomorrow morning, not this morning, this week, with Scott Ritter from 9 to 10 a.m. Other than that, all my other stuff, other than my one subscriber, weekly subscriber only show with Scott Ritter, is free. So if you can afford it, please help the channel, become a member on Rockfin. Also, a subscriber. A member's free. Also, other ways, if you get to help the channel, you can do patreon.com, $5, $10, $100 a month, whatever, $20, whatever you can afford. There's PayPal. Certainly Buy Me a Coffee is a great option. Buy Me a Coffee is great. It'll say buy a coffee for $5, and then it'll say how many coffees you want to buy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you can do is fine. And Cash App. There's my Cash App information, $ DC Radio Man. Thanks a lot, everybody. Gotta run. I'm out.